Hey guys, it's Thomas with GP Suspension. Today we're going to be doing the install on a 39mm fork. Let's get to it. You'll notice that I have the fork blown apart. The reason for that is usually you guys are getting stuff back from powder coating anyway. So it's easier to just say, take apart the fork per the factory manual. It's literally just a fork cap and a bottom bolt. And then that gets you to the point to where you need to be. We're using the Maxima suspension clean. It is basically denatured alcohol, but it's pretty convenient and it always sprays pretty well and it always cleans exceptionally well without leaving a film or damaging powder coating or anodizing. Always double check that it doesn't damage your powder coating because there are powder coats out there that are greater than others. So keep that in mind. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started and start assembling all of the parts that I need. For this, we're replacing the original factory bushings and fork seals. So I'm using the OEM Harley Davidson Sportster rebuild kit, and we'll grab that. These forks can always be a little bit difficult. You'll notice some of them, you know, the right fork leg, the rebound side, they don't generally have brake carrier bolts. So you've got to figure out a safe way to attach them to a vise or hold them for whatever your mechanism is to hold the lowers. So we've got our aluminum soft jaw vise here, and I'm only putting just a little bit of pressure on it, but just enough to where this thing isn't going to go anywhere while I'm doing this install. Starting by getting all of my parts that I need for this install pulled out and set aside. So I've got a bunch of, we've got bushings, washer, the circlip, and my oil seal and dust seal. Those are all needed for this, along with the crush washer and the bottom bolt for the lower to seal it. So these bushings for the factory bottom out stuff, I don't need them. They go in the trash for me. So we're gonna start by making sure everything's clean. We've already verified it. We put it inside of the vise. We're holding it down. So I'm just gonna make it simple for myself, so I don't have to have a bunch of extra tools or anything unnecessary. You notice here that the cartridge is a 27mm wrench. This is a seal head. That seal head is important for us right now because I'm gonna make sure I have the correct fork here, the cartridge. I do not. The right side on this specific model is the rebound. So I'm gonna grab my rebound leg, rebound right, compression left. So that's how the industry standard is, and we always wanna follow how the industry is. So if you take your suspension to get serviced by somebody, you know, there's not they're not questioning like, why is this cartridge in the wrong leg? Or it just keeps everything consistent. So everybody knows what to expect and it's convenient. So I'm just starting off. I'm literally just gonna put my cartridge down into the lower. And the fact that I don't have the chrome tube in right now actually gives me a little bit more autonomy with holding on to things while I'm tightening the crush washer and getting ready to install the chrome tube and making sure everything's just dialed and convenient for me. This is the most convenient way that I've found that'll allow me to hold the cartridge while I'm tightening the bottom bolt. So go ahead and put my new crush washer onto my new bolt that came with my factory Harley Davidson rebuild kit. And then I'm gonna grab my number 6 Allen, hold on to it. It doesn't have to be insanely long like these are. We just have really long Allens because it is convenient for me to be able to fish this guy into the bottom of the lower and then thread it into the cartridge. So I've already got it threaded. I'm threading it in by hand to start with, just so it's started. So if I go and I take my fancy light impact gun, it's very critical that you don't put a bunch of torque on these things. And then you actually spin it the correct direction. You're gonna hold it. You notice there I didn't put a lot of ugga-dugs into the lower. I didn't put a lot of force into that bolt, because we don't want to strip it out and we don't want to overcrush the crush washer. We're actually going to take our torque wrench, we're going to set it to our factory spec, find that inside your service manual, and then set it to whatever they say it is. I'm setting it off of my own experience and just what I usually set these things to, but I'm setting it to 20 Newton meters. So I'm going to put it on. I'm actually going to grab my number 27 wrench, hold onto the seal head. Just barely got a little bit of a grab on it. If I wanted to get extra tricky, one thing I can do is I can take my fork cap off, which you're going to have to take it off anyway. Take my fork cap off, take my box end of my wrench to hold the seal head. I'm just going to let it hang there while I fish the Allen into the fastener. So I have my specific torque wrench. These are my settings for my fork. Check your service manual, but I have it set to 160 inch-pounds. I'm just going to wait for my click, be happy with that. And now I can move on to my other fork leg. You can either decide to put your chrome tube on right now and get everything assembled and get one fork done at a time. That's up to you. But for brevity, I'm just going to do the other lower real quick, and then I'll move on. On the compression side, I have something to clamp onto that isn't a cosmetic item to clamp the vise with. So what I'm using here is my machined washer, or my machined spacer, and I'm just going to go ahead and bolt it to the lower caliper carrier rung there, making sure it's nice and clean, which it is. Let me get my other cartridge ready. Take the fork cap off right now because it's a little bit more convenient than hanging off the thing. So get that there. Get my other kit out. All right, so I've got everything that I need. Got my crush washer. On crush washers, I always like to put the sharp side of the washer towards the bolt because there's a more consistent sealing face on the back side of the washer. That way I know that the sharp edge is going to seal well against the bolt itself, and the rounded face is going to go to the underside of the lower, and it'll bed in and make a better seal just because of that. It's kind of like stacking the odds in your favor when you're assembling these things. So I'm going to thread it by hand again. Just holding my cartridge, making sure it's centered. I'm not using a power tool right now because if I had this thing kind of off at an angle and I threaded this in, well, we just cross-threaded it. We don't want that. And it could potentially be an issue when you're getting everything assembled. You don't want to have to go 2 steps forward and 1 step back when you're installing these. So, gave it a little bit of torque. I'm going to change out of this super long one because it was causing a bunch of flex. And I'm just going to switch to the short guy. Get the box end of my wrench here to hold it. Push my L in there. There's my click. That back, and now we can move on to getting our chrome tubes installed. So at this point, this is where you would actually take your chrome tube. If you haven't ordered a chrome tube that has the modification done to the bottom out cone already, what we do is we remove the bottom out cones from the chrome tubes, and that allows the chrome tube to pass over this without interfering. So it's very critical. It will not work if you don't have it done. You won't even be able to get the cartridge into it. You can order the chrome tubes from us pre-modified. This is what a stock chrome tube looks like. You can see in the middle here, there's a bottom out cone. This bottom out cone, it's not gonna pass through the seal head. You won't even be able to install the kit without it. So what we do is we grind the face of this on our lathe, trim the little, the shoulder off of it, and then we'll take something to smack that bottom out cone with. It's a little bit violent. Obviously, it can be a little bit hard if you don't have a long enough rod. This is a 26¼ inch chrome tube. We have them in both sizes for the 32 and the 34-inch kit. One is a 24¼ I think, and the other one is a 26¼ So this is a 26¼ so the rod's a little bit short, but you see that bottom out cone's coming out. You know, this is the easy part where we're just knocking the cone out. The hard part is actually finding a mechanism to grind this off. So it's highly recommended that you get the correct chrome tube when you order the kit. And that's it. That's the first one done. So we just knocked out the bottom out cone. As you can see, it's dirty. So I want to make sure there's no metal shavings. We don't want any foreign objects inside of this fork when it's working. What ends up happening is metal or debris or hair will make its way into the piston and it'll keep a shim open. When a shim stays open, you lose the ability, you lose control over whatever legs function it is. You lose the control on the rebound circuit or the compression circuit. So you don't want that. So you want it to be clean. It's critical that it's clean. Can't drive that home hard enough. So I'm just gonna spray her down. I'm being pretty liberal with how much of this I'm using because I'd rather have a little bit more of an expense I'd rather pay a little bit extra than have to do this again. It's not fun to waste oil just to clean something. So as you can see, it's also sharp still. So I don't like that either. I'm gonna be OCD about it. And I'm personally gonna deburr it because I have a deburring tool here. So I might as well just deburr it. And there's metal on that came out just from the deburring process too. So I don't want that. So I'm gonna clean it again. Make sure I don't see anything. I'm satisfied with that, with how it looks. I'm gonna inspect the bushing because I don't want a bad bushing. I'm gonna look at the Harley bushing that came with it and that I pulled out of the box, and I'm gonna look at the bushing that came with this chrome tube. This is a graphite bushing, which you can scratch with your fingernail. And this is the Harley bushing, which seems to be some kind of nylon vinyl with graphite infused into it. So I like these more. I don't really have too much of a preference. I usually look for whichever one's gonna have better tolerances. So if I put this in and it drags, I'm gonna take it right back out and put this one in to see if it drags or if it's more free floating. So there's that. I'm putting this guy on. I've got the bushing on. I'm gonna go ahead and grease it up because I like everything to float freely as it's traveling. I'm literally just gonna grease the whole fork tube because why not? It's better for it. Sliding that guy over it, just going right down. Got my bushing, my outer bushing. I'm gonna go ahead and grease the inside and the outside of this because I've got to press it into the lower. And then I have my bushing washer, my retaining washer. And I'm just gonna make sure there's not any crazy sharp edges so it doesn't scratch anything while it's going down. I'm gonna go ahead and press this in. This is what we have for our 39mm kit. There's that. Notice that I didn't install the seal and press the bushing at the same time. There's a reason for that. When you have more stuff that you're pressing into a spot, the amount of load that you can take off of hammering it down, the more load you can take off, the better. So just do it in 2 steps. It's a little bit easier. We're also going to grease up the inner lip of the seal. Set that aside there. I have a Ziploc bag. This is just a quick little trick. We want to protect our fork seal as we're installing it onto the chrome tube. So I'm just going to take the corner of the Ziploc bag and I'm going to cut it off of it. That's gone. And I'm just going to put this guy right over the top like that. I'm going to take my oil seal and I'm going to make sure it's oriented correctly. There's more volume on the oil side of the seal. The dry side has less volume and there's less space in the seal on the top side than there is on the bottom side. You want to make sure that the side with more space on it goes down, because when this thing compresses, it actually uses that space to pressurize the sealing face to make sure it keeps constant and good seal through the stroke of the travel. So I'm gonna go ahead and slide down the oil seal, just kind of work it around to get it over it first. Pull this guy. It's the cheapest special tool you'll ever see. And then I'm gonna go ahead and press that guy in, and I'm gonna go ahead and finish pressing the oil seal down. Got it home. I can see the lip. I can see the lip of the circlip ring, the recess that they put inside of the lower for you, and it almost just falls in. You might take your oil seal driver or your pick just to get that thing home the rest of the way. And I'm also stroking the fork here to make sure it feels all right. I'll put this guy back on the vise. Feels all right. Feels about normal for some stock Harley seals. That's okay. Press this guy on. I don't need an impact driver or anything crazy there. All right, now that this thing's assembled, I can go ahead and actually fill it with oil, charge it, make sure it's bled, and get it the rest of the way assembled. So every couple of years, we like to test oils and see what's on the market. And after a bunch of testing over the winter, we decided that the new Motul 5-weight, the factory line that they're offering right now, is the best on the market. And we tested a lot of oils. So you can get this from us, and it's public. It's available via other means too. But right now, I'm just going to go ahead and pour the oil into the fork. I'm just watching it so I know that I don't overfill it and pour oil everywhere, which if you do, it's okay. There we go. Got a little bit of bubbling happening here right at the top. And I'm just going to go ahead and bleed this thing out. Yeah, there's bubbles coming up. That's because there's air inside of the cartridge, and there's air in the chamber between the outer tube and the inner tube, between the 2 bushings. So all of that is coming out. It's actually very important that this thing bled up really easily, really nicely. I'm getting resistance as I press down. This is not the difficult side to bleed sometimes. Sometimes the rebound can be a little bit difficult, but I'll cover that. So that's bled. I'm actually also going to stroke this because there's a hole drilled into the chrome tube that allows air and oil to pass through. And when we're setting our oil height, we want to make sure that this gets stroked to make sure that that chamber fills up with oil as well. Because if you set your oil height, it will be affected by, if you set the oil height and this is empty and full of air, the first time this gets stroked, your oil height drops, and you don't want that. You want consistency. So I'm gonna go ahead and set the oil height. For our 39mm kits, our oil height is 125mm. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm gonna go ahead and set the length of my probe to 125. The other thing I'm gonna do, so I'm gonna take my rebound adjustment rod out and I'm gonna slide this thing down the side, just like that. This is totally normal. This is where I want it to stop at. You'll notice that all of our cartridge kits, that this is our point of measurement. Sometimes it can be from the chrome tube if it's above it, but for the most part, I always measure to the top of the cap adapter. It's technically what that's called. So you can hear that. I'm not pulling any oil, so I want to continue filling that up with oil. These longer these longer forks, they have a ton of volume to them, so you can feel like you're pouring oil for a while. That could definitely be the case. There we go. Taking the oil that I just pulled out, putting it back. And now we're not finished with oil setting, with the oil height setting. These are our spring spacers. I'm also double checking to make sure that it's clean. Drop that guy in, just kind of let it rest into it, because sometimes when you drop it, whatever oil it lands in will want to shoot up past it and kind of make a light shower. So one last time I'm setting the oil height. That's one thing that we do differently from other companies, is we set our oil height with the spring spacer in. We find it that you can get more consistent readings if you have your spring spacer in, and it's also simpler to set. So if you ever have to go in and you don't want to dump out all of your oil and you want to change your oil height because you're a tuner, or you know some things that you just want to play around with, which is okay, that's on you, you're the tuner. But it's simpler to just set the oil height with the spring spacer in and just really work on that, because the volume of this doesn't change. The volume of the spring changes. So if you have this in there and you have your oil height set, then you'll be good to go. It's kind of it's a preference thing amongst the industry of the aftermarket industry. So I'm gonna go ahead and put my rebound rod back in. I understand this is the compression side. I know it's called a rebound rod, but that is just its title. So at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and put our GP bleed tool on. I bled this whole cartridge without it, but it's actually important for me to have right now to do this next step where I install the spring. So the 39 kit takes a special spring. It's a 30 by 300, so it's 30 millimeters in diameter and it's 300 millimeters long. So with the industry, you always put stiffer spring in the rebound leg. So we're doing the compression right now. So I'm gonna pick my softer spring, which is a 1.0, and I'm gonna have the engraved number facing up. So if you ever have to take your fork cap off and you just wanna see what spring is in there, you can take the fork cap off and see the engraving that's in there, and you don't have to go searching for it. So there's that. I'm setting that in there, and I have my spring jacker. You slide the spring jacker over the top, and then you take your flat wrench, your GP flat wrench. You take the 17 millimeter side, it's the side with the hole on it, and you slide it in just to the edge of the spring jacker right there. You're pulling this guy up, and you take the cap adapter, and you can see that there's tooling marks there, and you slide the flat wrench onto it. You can unscrew the GP bleed tool or the pull tool, and you can put your fork cap on now. This is very critical. What's important here is you also bought this fancy fork cap tool. This is not the time for the fork cap tool. You put this thing aside, you're gonna take your number 14 wrench here, and you're gonna thread this onto the cartridge, into the cap adapter. You take your 14, put on the preload adjuster, hold your flat wrench, and tighten down your fork cap to the cap adapter. Got it nice and tight. It's about 20 Newton meters. Don't want to be tricky. We can use, so I'm just going to take this thing set at 160 inch-pounds right now. Let our click. And now we can slide our chrome tube up. I'm also just kind of looking around, make sure there's not any foreign objects in here. You wouldn't be surprised by how much hair is in everything. You can always find hair somewhere. Cleanliness is important. So I'm just threading the fork cap on by hand. Saw that? Now I'm gonna take the fork out of the vise. Don't drop my washer. And I'm gonna put my fork in the vise. But wait, this is still oily from putting the oil seal on. So I'm gonna clean it up. Just to not waste the spray, I'm just gonna spray this down. I'm gonna follow it with the rag here. Naturally, my hands are oily, so I don't wanna touch it directly. I wanna make sure my fork cap is nice and clean. And I'm going to install this into the vise now, making it easy for myself. So I'm taking care to not over tighten this. I've only got it just snug on the vise. And I have it in a place to where the fork doesn't travel to. So those are two critical things. I usually like to clamp it in a spot where the triple tree clamps, and you'll always see a little bit of fade marks from the clamp of the lower triple tree. And you can usually just put it to that point and put the vise on it, and it's fine. So I'm gonna take my fork cap tool, and for the 39s, it is a 014 cap face. But if you ordered the toolkit from us, we already know which cap face to put on here for you. So it'll have arrived with the correct part. And then I use a number 24 wrench to hold on to the top of it. I'm actually gonna grab the fork too, so I can feel if it wants to start twisting. And I'm just gonna tighten this thing down to about 20 Newton meters as well. Nothing too crazy. Take this guy out. We're gonna set it aside for when we put our final settings in. All right, got our rebound leg again. Put this all together. Make sure it's clean, make sure no hair fell in there, no metal shavings. Grab my inner tube and my rod. Knockout. Got that out. I'm gonna take the opportunity to deburr it while everything's a mess as well. I'm being OCD here. It's your baby, so I wanna make sure it's perfect, right? So I'm just gonna go and I'm taking all the sharp edges off. Over time, metal can just break off from bottoming out or external forces. It's completely normal. It's kind of why engines have break-in periods in first services. Well, suspension's not terribly different, you know, things break in, and we want to make sure that we get as much of the break-in accomplished so you have as much performance out of your forks and your cartridge kit for the lifespan of for its first service life, for its first rebuild. All right, taking off the graphite bushing that came with the chrome tube, just because I like the Harley one. These ones are more susceptible to damage and thrust wear, whereas the Harley ones seem to be a little bit better and more, have better service life than the graphite ones. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this guy on. I'm gonna get it nice and lubed up, put her into the lower. Make sure this spins. If there's any drag there, you might have an issue. So if you spin it, it's a consistent clean. If it had any drag, it would give you some insight that there's a foreign object between the bushing and the chrome tube. So if you have any issues there, pull it apart again, clean it, and then reassemble. So I'm gonna just grease it up. And it's actually important for this to be able to float on the chrome tube, because if this thing's able to spin, then it has more of an even wear pattern. Not normal for it to spin. They don't just accidentally spin, but if there is anything that causes it to spin, you want it to be more free than you want it to to move. So that's greased. There's that. I'm gonna grease the inside and the outside of my outer bushing. Apply liberally. Grease is your friend. Just drop that down. Also checking the new washer for super sharp edges, anything that would snag, anything that would scratch. You don't want anything to snag or scratch anything. Put the rounded side up. I'm gonna press it in. You can use any oil seal driver. I actually prefer this mechanism because it allows me to control everything, and I'm not running a inside diameter too closely to this chrome tube. I'm always anxious about scratching something. So that's what I personally prefer. If you're running a 39mm kit or you're running the 39mm fork seal driver, cool. There's nothing wrong with it. This is just what I have because I like it. So I don't know why I put it back, because I need it to put the oil seal on. So we're gonna grab our super cheap special tool, throw that guy over the top of the chrome tube. I'm gonna oil up, we're gonna lube up the oil seal. Gonna slide it down, make sure it's correctly oriented on the fork. So that is there. Hold on to this guy. Wow. Now I can put it back. All right. So, retaining clip time. Push that guy in. Use a pick, whatever you can do to not drag any tools across the chrome tube. Check it, see how it strokes, feels about right. When you grease them up, it does cause a little bit of drag initially, but that drag is necessary for, you don't want to be pushing dry bushings in and out of the lowers. That's nice and happy. I'm going to take the opportunity to reposition this. Now, because the rebound doesn't have any brake caliper carriers, I'm just going to go ahead and put this guy into our notch on the vise so I can fill it with oil and charge it up. But it makes it a little bit weird because I'll have to loosen up the vise to stroke the chrome tube, just so I can get that cavity between the inner tube and the outer tube filled with oil. Now, it's also, the rebounds can be a little bit tricky to charge, so I'll show you my process for charging the rebounds. Basically what I'll do is I'll fill the fork up pretty high with oil, and if it's not charging, then what I'll do is I'll thread the fork cap on, and I'll thread the fork cap onto the cap adapter. I'll thread the fork cap out into the inner tube, and I'll actually take it out and I'll stroke it and I'll pressurize it, because what happens is the internal pressure of the fork itself helps push the oil past the shims inside of the cartridge. So that's pretty critical. I've got a pretty high oil level. The oil level is literally right up to there right now, and I will put my fork cap on. So that guy's nice and threaded. I'm not messing with the rebound adjuster. This is actually charged, but we're gonna still do it anyway. I'm gonna lift up by the cap, and then I'm gonna stroke the inner tube up to the cap. So what we're doing is we're putting a bunch of air inside of the system now into the fork, and when we thread this guy on, I don't have to do too much threading. I don't even have to tighten it. All I really need is the O-ring to get below the inner tube's lip, just into its sealing surface. And I'm gonna actually just put it on the floor, put the lower on the floor. I'm gonna press into it. You can hold it with your feet, whatever you wanna do in my out of frame. And you can press into it until you start getting resistance when you're pulling it back up. So this thing's bled up, but that's what you would do. Just gonna go ahead and push this guy down. And by doing that, we also filled the cavity between the two tubes. It's important to fill the cavity between the two tubes, because when we're setting our oil height, if you set it and it's empty in between there, the first time that you extend the fork and press down on it, that's gonna fill up with oil. The oil level was here, right? We're metaphorically saying it was here. But when that cavity fills up, it drops the oil level. Now, it's really critical for any cartridge kits that are not sealed to make sure that you have an oil level that is above the seal head. So when the oil is above the seal head, it doesn't allow any air to get sucked in through the seal head and it maintains control over the stroke that it's metering. So this thing's actually kind of charged because I compressed it, so I'm gonna have a little bit of air escape. There it was. I'm gonna take my fork cap back off. I'm gonna drop my chrome tube the rest of the way. Pull my rebound rod out. I'm looking down to see where the oil level is to see if I need to add any oil. Need to add some oil. Remember, the oil height on this is 125 millimeters. I have the whole fork is bottomed out. The cartridge is completely bottomed, and I have the rebound rod out, and I'm using the top of the cap adapter to press against, just like this, when I'm setting my oil level. My rebound rod back in, I'm not done. Spring spacer has to go in. Set my oil level again. Now I can put my rebound rod in. Make sure there's no hair or anything. And grab my bleed tool, thread it onto the cap. Make sure you have it threaded, make sure it threads all the way. The bleed tool has two different sides for a whole multitude of cartridges. We designed it to work with a lot of OEM rods, so you can pull them up and bleed them if you need to. If you're a shop who does this kind of work, you can get this and be able to bleed at other brands of stuff, because each side has two different diameters, and each side has a different thread pitch than the other. So that's threaded on. I'm gonna put my spring in, make sure the engraving's on the top. That's the rebound side, so it's the right side, so we have the stronger spring in it. Put my spring jacker in. This is basically what the preload adjuster presses against to put preload onto the fork, or to put preload into the spring. Got my flat wrench, just putting it up to the edge just to make it easier on myself. And then you can see here that there's a tooling face. You can see here there's a tooling face that you're sliding the flat wrench onto. And if you want to see that, without the spring on it, when you slide it on, you're basically just doing this. and it's holding this where you can unthread it. So we'll go ahead and put the spring and the spring jacker back on. Engraving up, spring jacker on. Got our flat wrench. Pull up on the pull rod. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a pain. There we go. Especially when you got a nice strong spring. What I'm fighting there is the top out spring in our cartridge. The top out spring is really what improves our kit compared to the rest of the market. Nobody else is offering top out springs for this specific model of fork, and it's really what makes our kit a step above the rest. So, got our fork cap here. Go ahead and thread it on to the cap adapter, and then just like last time, we're going to take our number 14 wrench. We're going to thread it onto the preload adjuster, tighten it down to 20 Newton meters, but in this specific scenario, I'm using my torque wrench to tighten it to 160 inch-pounds. There's that. You don't want to over tighten these because it can cause problems. In the end, you might end up having to send them to us. It's pretty difficult to remove these apart, because if you round out this preload adjuster, it's basically a new fork cap, because we have to hold on to this to break it free, and that usually locks up the fork cap. So it's very important that you do not use your fork cap tool. This fork cap tool is only for torquing the fork cap to the chrome tube. So we'll pull this up. You notice that I forgot my dust seal. That's okay. The diameter of the fork cap is the same as the diameter of the chrome tube, or the inner tube. Got that pressed on. It looks good. I go ahead and clean this. I managed to thread that on enough to where the seal is getting engaged, so I'm not spraying any chemicals or any solvent into the actual fork itself. We don't want it breaking down the oil. Grab that. And I'm gonna imagine where the triple tree is. It's probably about there. Snug that up to where it holds its own weight. Take my fork cap tool. Tighten this guy down. Grab my number 24 wrench to torque it the rest of the way. There we go. Now we're done with the assembly of our fork, but we're not done with the fork yet. We need to set the fork to baseline settings. Baseline means it's the starting point for you to start from when you're tuning your motorcycle specifically for you. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take our adjuster, the brass adjuster. It adjusts a bypass, which is just a needle into an orifice, and it basically controls how the stroke gets metered. So if this is the rebound, it controls how fast it will allow the fork to expand. On the compression side, it controls how fast it allows the fork to compress, right? So we're gonna set the rebound first with our number 3 Allen. And I've got a ball end, it's nice. And you can hear we've got clicks. Our usual range is about 32. It can be anywhere from 28 to 32. So I thread it to where I feel resistance, and then I count backwards. So I just screwed the adjuster in all the way in, tightened it, righty-tighty, till I felt a little bit of resistance, and now I'm gonna count backwards to 13. 13 clicks. That's the starting point. You can be anywhere from 12 to 14, but 13 is usually the number that I'll set them at initially. You'll also find that your cartridge kit came to you set to 12 or 13 clicks. That's where I always set them when I build them. So they'll make it to you that they're set already. The one thing I don't set for you is the preload, because it's something that has to get adjusted to do the install of the fork. So the next thing I'm gonna grab is my number 14 wrench, and I'm gonna unscrew it. We're going backwards. It's completely unscrewed now, and I'm gonna tighten it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The reason we picked 6 is it's 6mm of preload. Our cartridge, when I tightened the fork cap onto the cap adapter, it was putting in 6mm of preload to start with. There's 6mm of preload in our cartridges that you can never touch. There's always an installed 6mm. So when I put 6 turns into this, it means it's now at 12 total. So that's something to consider when you're thinking about your spring rate and how much preload is. So if you're talking to other people about what spring rates they have and how much preload they have and what their weight is, it'll give you a little bit extra to think about, like, oh, I have 6 turns in it, but it's actually 12. So you always got to add 6 to your number if you're talking in technical terms to other people. I have 12 total millimeters of preload on this spring. That's totally fine, and that's where it's expected to be. I'll just check it real quick, make sure I have metering, and I do. When you get it installed in your bike, basically you're gonna install it, make sure you're happy with the positioning, and you're gonna make sure that your sag is correct, 33% of stroke. These things have 125mm of travel, so you're looking for about 38 to 42mm of sag, with you from it being fully extended, topped out, to you sitting on the bike with 38mm-ish of sag. So if you don't have those numbers, you're gonna go ahead and add preload or remove preload. Once you're satisfied with the amount of sag you have, you're actually gonna adjust the rebound to match. And what that means is you're gonna go ride the thing, or you're gonna push on it, and if it feels too loose, it looks like a pogo stick, you're gonna tighten these down 2 or 3 clicks. We're talking about the brass adjuster. If it feels like it's really, really harsh, and it comes up and it rises really slowly after hitting a bump, you're gonna loosen it up, because that's what that would be technically called, is packing down. So you're gonna loosen your rebound adjuster. The last thing you're checking is the compression. The compression, in my philosophy, like our current philosophy, is the communication between the ground and your hands. Your feel is basically where the compression comes into play. If your feel is telling you don't like something, you have to make sure that your preload is dialed and your rebound is dialed for the preload, because those can make the waters murky. They can confuse things. If your preload is wrong or your rebound is wrong, it can affect your feel. So really, like, setting your compression settings is the last 2 or 3% of the total picture of setting your suspension up for you. There's people that will disagree, and I embrace it, because suspension is wonderful in the perspective that there's so many different ways of solving problems with suspension. This is just our philosophy and my personal philosophy with compression. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this aside and set the base settings for the compression.